Twice.
This is the European history lecture for Thursday, the 10th of June, 2021. This is the last instructional day of this school year. So, where we've been and where we're going. We had talked in detail about the killing fields of Cambodia. If I have time at the end of class today, I may show you a film clip from the movie The Killing Fields, which does a very good job of telling one person's story during that event. What's important to know is that the Khmer Rouge, the Cambodian communists, kill over 1 million people in a nation that had barely 3 million people at the beginning of their reign. In 4 years, people are killed for crimes such as wearing eyeglasses, having fillings in your teeth, speaking a foreign language, having lived in a city, having been a teacher, having gotten a college degree. They wanted to return to a world that never existed. The utopia of 1,000 years ago when everyone was a peasant and everyone's thoughts were in the hands of the Anka, of the party, of the leader. And the entire nation would be a human communal being in thought, word, and deed. That's what they were trying to build, because that's better than what we've got. The tendency of modern humans to genocide. Why? Why do these things come out in the 20th century and into the 21st century? I mean, during the Middle Ages, during the Mongol attacks, during the Dark Ages before ancient classical civilizations, I guess it makes sense. You want to wipe out your tribal enemies. But why is it that this darkness comes out now?
It's easier to pull a trigger than it is to burn a book.
That's one answer. Although burning a book is fun too. You get the warmth and you get the bonfire, you get to dance around it and sing songs. And maybe you can throw more books in and try to control where the sparks go. It's easier to pull a trigger than read a book. I do have an answer. It's my answer. It need not be your answer. But it is an answer. Mr. Heaton already referenced technology. The technology of the surveillance state has grown to such a point where if you read 1984 by George Orwell, who is an honest communist, who came to the conclusion that what was being practiced in the name of communism was an abomination. His telescreens, his two-way televisions, the means by which Big Brother controls the thoughts of the people of Oceania seem quaint by today's standards. Where you've got face recognition technology, where we have it here at the school to make sure that your temperature is fine. But that technology is used in China today to monitor everyone and everything that's outside of people's private homes. And trust me, there are some inside people's private homes too, if you're under a certain kind of surveillance, where everything you do is counted by machine, an algorithm. And your ability to function in life is determined by a social credit score that is measured by your ability and willingness to conform your thought, words, and deeds to the Communist Party's current stance. So technology makes it possible to organize people, to monitor them, and to kill them in large numbers. But that is simply the means. Honestly, my wife last night had the insight that people on my side of the aisle who don't believe in gun control should stop permitting and stop utilizing the term gun violence. Guns don't get up, walk around, and start killing human beings. They're not Terminators, not yet. The human being that pulls the trigger and aims the weapon is the killer. We have an excess of psychosis because in the name of political correctness, we closed our asylums, our institutions of mental health. And we have people who live on the streets who have no business being in public because they're a danger to themselves and others. But they haven't committed any crime exactly, and so they can walk around doing things. If you want an interesting study of this from a somewhat socialist point of view, see the Joaquin Phoenix movie Joker. And you see the story of a mentally ill fellow living in the city. The stairway he dances up and down is in the Bronx, a few miles away from where I grew up. Um, Guns are a means. They make it easier, but they don't make it possible. Otherwise, the Palestinian stab campaign and the stab epidemic that Britain has faced over the last few years wouldn't matter. They do. You don't need a gun to kill someone. All you need is a willingness to kill someone, and you can do it with your bare hands, with a rock, with a stick, with a chair, with poison, with any number of things. The willingness, the decision to do it, that's the problem. And that leads me to my conclusion about all this. Western civilization conquers the planet. Before World War I and after World War I, the European empires are in charge of the world. So that means that Western civilization is ubiquitous. Western civilization spreads to the entire planet. Now, personally, I think this is a good thing because the West produces the concept of inalienable human rights, among many, many other things. However, the West at its apex of power, is not the West at its apex of moral scrupulousness. By the time the European empires conquer the world, a good number of the leadership, not only in political circles, but in academic circles, in medical circles, in business circles, have abandoned a Judeo-Christian worldview, a worldview that holds everyone morally accountable for their actions. And instead, they have embraced a secularist social Darwinism, a survival of the fittest that removes mercy and compassion and all forms of human kindness from the equation of decision making. Oh, that's mere sentimentality. The notion that we are a predator species engaged in an existential struggle for survival where there is no mercy and no quarter, where anything is possible. Whereas, as Nietzsche horrifically wrote, Gott ist tot, God is dead. In a world like that, nothing is off the table. Nothing. The U.S. Senate was actually debating against regulating combining human and animal DNA in laboratories. Because God forbid that might restrict some biologists' Dr. Moreau vision of how to cure things. Do you really want to play God? Do you really want to make living werewolves? Do you really want to combine DNA in such a way that may produce a super germ that we don't have any immunities to? At the moment, we in the West get control of the world, abandon the core beliefs that put us in a position to take over the world. National Socialism, Communism, and Fascism are unimaginable in the Victorian age because Victorian Westerners would have rejected them as irreligious, as satanic, as prideful, as dangerous. But in the 20th century, where those quaint Christian notions have been debunked, where the quaint Jewish notion that there is one God who is the source of us all and the judge of us all, that's God. So if you can, why not play God? Why not imagine that Il Duce or Der Führer or Vosht or any of these other would-be demigods actually know how to achieve utopia? The very notion of wanting to achieve utopia is a fever dream. Who on earth would actually want to live in an ideal society? Because ideal isn't a human value. Ideal is an unattainable dream. Perfection is an unattainable goal. To place perfection as our collective goal is to place us all each and every one of us, in an impossible situation where sooner or later we will be judged unfit. None of us, not any human being born, has been fit to live in paradise. But in the name of paradise, we turn the world into a living hell. Again and again and again throughout the 20th century. We are scientific giants and moral midgets. We have the ability through atomic weapons to destroy all life on Earth. We also have the ability to do that with poison gas, with super germs. We can destroy human civilization any number of a dozen ways. Fire bombs, mustard gas. We can look into the human mind in a way that we never could before. Psychology is barely 130 years old. And look at how many of the social sciences use psychology, psychological methodology, and theory as its base. We've only been in space, really, for 60, 65 years, at most. But we can't agree on what is right and what is wrong. As a society, we debate whether third trimester abortion is a good idea. I could argue both sides during the first trimester, during the first 3 months of pregnancy. I don't believe in it, but I could argue it. I could see the logic on both sides. But how any person who can look in a mirror and sleep at night could argue that taking a baby out of a woman's womb in the third trimester and killing it is in any way morally defensible, except if the life of the mother is in the process of being ended, is beyond me. It's beyond me. Now, I may be wrong. You may think I'm wrong. But ask yourself, third trimester pregnancy, what does a child look like in the womb? Could the child, if the mother died in the third trimester, be cut out C-section style and saved? The answer is yes, in many cases. We can't agree. We don't agree. Oh, how silly of me to bring something like that up. How many other things have I brought up this year that have made you just go, "Grr"? We can't agree on so many things. Because we abandon our Judeo-Christian roots. And those roots are not intolerant. They are not fundamentalist. They are not the Gilead of that stupid series with the women in the hats, The Handmaid's Tale. Judeo-Christian values and the patriarchy gave us the American Republic, a republic that ended slavery, a republic that ended ended the civil rights abuses of Jim Crow, that gave women the right to vote, that gave former slaves the right to vote, that were willing to fight wars. Don't assume for a moment that it was a secular, morally neutral society that did those things. It was the Judeo-Christian West in the form of the United States. This modern stuff is less than I am old. I'm in my mid-50s, so what have we done since the moon landings? Well, we may have done a few things. We are moral midgets and scientific giants. That's my answer. Doesn't have to be yours. But you, as a thinking being, should wonder why the 19th century, with all of its primitivism, has societies that are much nicer to its people, even to its enemies, than the 20th and early 21st. Because there is a difference. Do any of you have thoughts right now? Okay. When your life is affected by something that the Chinese Communist Party does, or the North Korean Communists do, or the Iranian theocrats do, when your life is affected because there are people in our own cities burning them down, I'm sure you will think about it, because you'll have to wonder why this is happening. because it will affect you and your loved ones. Human nature will make you think. I hope that you will consider looking at history. I've already talked about the Shah. Today, we'll focus on the rise of the European Union. After the World Wars, after the Second World War, Europe is a giant graveyard. It's a charnel house. Tens of millions of unburied dead. Tens of millions of displaced persons. And the Europeans look around, just like I said you will someday, and ask, why? Why did this happen? Because they have to. Because they're living in ruins. Because they have loved ones that are gone, or insane, or crippled because of what just happened. Again, for the second time in 25 years. So, Winston Churchill, who was out of office thanks to the 1945 election, began traveling and speaking. And he didn't just speak in Fulton, Missouri against communism. He began traveling around Europe, advocating a new United States of Europe. He wanted a United States of Europe as a solution to the ongoing problems of war in Europe. This is Churchill, not Wilson. Churchill's many things, but he's not a wild-eyed idealist. Churchill believes that by combining into a United States of Europe, the constant struggles between France and Germany and Russia over who would rule the North European plain would be settled. The answer is we all, together, share the North European plain. Churchill's ideas begin to spark real interest among the intellectual elites that have survived the war. There is a Dutchman named Paul-Henri Spaak, S-P-A-A-K. And where we are, if you're wondering, is section 9 towards the European Union, and you see some maps. We're somewhere in the first few numbers. Paul-Henri Spaak begins to work with people in France, in Holland, in Belgium, in Luxembourg, and Western Germany to try to take Churchill's idea and make it a reality. Now, so you may want to write down Paul, P-A-U-L, Henri, H-E-N-R-I, Spaak, S-P-A-A-K. He is one of the founders of what became the European Union. Write this name down too. Foreign Minister Schumann of France. Foreign Minister. S-C-H-U-M-A-N-N. Sounds like a German name, but he's the French foreign minister, late 1940s. And Foreign Minister Schumann of France initiates something which is called the European Steel and Coal Community. So we're on item D. You will remember that Germany controls the Ruhr Valley. The Ruhr Valley is Europe's industrial heart. Coal-rich, iron-rich, factory-rich, power of all kinds, including water power, by the way, hydroelectric dams. What Schumann proposes is that the Ruhr and other intensely productive areas of Europe, that anything having to do with the production of steel and the use of coal, which is the primary heating source in Europe in the late 1940s, be under international control. Pan-national European control. And the other countries, including the West Germans, who are still not fully independent yet, but the rest of the countries agree. So the ESC, the European Steel, The ESCC, I'm terrible at these acronyms. The ESCC, the European Steel and Coal Community, just remember it as that, I'll list it as that on your test. The European Steel and Coal Community is established in 1950 with steel production and coal production on the Western European mainland, this is west of the communist areas, obviously, under pan-national control, under control of this agency. The possibility, the wherewithal of anyone, Germany, France, going to war without the consent of the others is lost. Germany no longer controls the Ruhr in terms of its steel production, and steel production is at the heart of modern war. So Germany cannot just summon up another massive army, not without the involvement of the other powers. Also, the riches of one country are being shared by all. This European steel and coal community is going to be the basis of the next step in unifying Europe. That's in 1950. 7 years later, at Rome, the Treaty of Rome is signed that establishes the EEC, the European Economic Community, otherwise known as the Common Market. The EEC isn't just about steel and coal. It covers most large industries. And what it says is that like the Zollverein, like the Hanseatic League, Western European member nations of the European Economic Community, of the EEC, of the Common Market, will have a common trading zone, but more than that, a common industrial and economic policy. The common market does not yet include a common currency, nor does it include a lot of pan-national regulations, but it does include the beginnings of that. It includes regulations and systems for the transfer of monies from francs to Deutschmarks, or Reichsmarks. No, Deutschmarks at this point. The European Common Market is going to prove amazingly successful in terms of boosting the wealth of Western Europe. Some would argue on the back of German workers, because there are some serious cultural differences between the German workforce and its notion of a day of hard work and the workforce in southern France or Italy. Still, after World War II, that doesn't seem to bother anyone. The EEC thrives. However, the British refused to join the EEC because they believe in what's called a Confederal Union. A Confederal Union has strong nations in close relationship to one another, but the primary power is retained by the nations. The other members of the EEC, the founding members of the Treaty of Rome, France, West Germany, the Low Countries, and Italy, all conclude, Roman Empire style, that what we should have is a federal European Union, not a confederal. A confederal European Union is with strong nations closely aligned. A federal European Union is a strong unity with the nations as subsidiary parts of it. Now, this is a big difference between Britain and the rest of Europe anyway. Remember, Britain comes up with the type of freedom we have here, heavily individual. Britain's common law is the basis of American law, based on precedent. But the other Europeans are much more closely connected to the old Roman Empire. And the old Roman Empire was less oriented to the individual, more oriented to the good of society. Its legal system was, as we've discussed earlier in this year, the Napoleonic Code, not English common law. And that means a law code, centrally promulgated, centrally regulated, with much stronger governmental powers than the British would have been comfortable with. So the British stay away from the Treaty of Rome and the European Union at first. However, they quickly changed their minds. And by the early 1960s, they have tried to set up an outer fringe of countries. And you'll see on this top map, there are dark nations. Those are the nations of the outer fringe that Britain is trying to organize confederally. And you've got the light shade of gray, which is the European Economic Community. The problem is the outer fringe is not coherent. The British economy is beginning to stagnate. So in the early 1960s, and this we're on item G now, going into H, Prime Minister Harold Macmillan asks formally for membership in the EU. In order for this to happen, the British are going to have to give up their special relationship with the other nations of the British Commonwealth, which is, remember, the new name for the British Empire. Instead of being kith and kin with the Australians and the New Zealanders, for example, and the Canadians, the British prime relationships will be with France and Germany and Italy. The British say they're willing to go along with it, but France is staying in the way, because France is led by President Charles de Gaulle. Now, de Gaulle was the head of the Free French during World War II. The Free French left France and fought on from Britain. The Free French were somewhat involved in the resistance movements against the Nazis within France, but only somewhat, because there were other Frenchmen that hated these guys. De Gaulle always insisted on France being treated like an equal partner, but it wasn't. In fact, France was not. De Gaulle and his group were a few soldiers and others who wanted France back, but they were completely dependent upon British and American help. Oh God, de Gaulle hated this. So de Gaulle went out of his way to mess with the British and the Americans. In 1942, when the Americans go into the Mediterranean with the British, we are not thrilled with this, and we want a new Free French leader. And we're pushing to get rid of de Gaulle because he's an obnoxious stick in the mud. The British government, who's had to put up with this guy for the last few years, is also willing to go along. One man saves de Gaulle, Harold Macmillan. Harold Macmillan is the British plenipotentiary in the Mediterranean. What that means is he acts and makes executive decisions as if he were the prime minister for that region. Macmillan sees in de Gaulle the spirit of France, the stubborn spirit of France, and he sees in de Gaulle's silly pride some notion of the French trying to keep their pride in the midst of the horrors of the German occupation. Macmillan sticks his neck out to keep the Americans and the other British from getting rid of de Gaulle. So Macmillan assumes that de Gaulle will remember this. Britain asks for membership. De Gaulle says, I'll think about it. He then goes on television and he talks about, in a long discursion, les Anglo-Saxons, how they are maritime, while France and the other Europeans are continental, how they are mercantile, while France and the rest of the other Europeans are more oriented towards culture. He goes on talking about the differences between les Anglo-Saxons and the rest of Europe, and then finally says, should the British be allowed to join Europe? No! And he says it with such relish. Oh God, what a guy. So Macmillan is, no good deed goes unpunished. He's speechless, but Britain's out. France blossomed. De Gaulle is also responsible for developing French atomic weapons. Well, for actually pulling France out of NATO. De Gaulle doesn't like the fact that NATO has an American general, always. Because what we do is we fund NATO and we are backing NATO up with the American military deterrent. Also, it was an American supreme commander that helped win World War II. So France says, we're out. If we can't have a French commander, then we're out. And for 20 years, the French are out of NATO. They're still sort of in. As the Russians invade, they'll probably help us. But it's a pain in the neck. And that's de Gaulle in a nutshell, a pain in the neck. Unless you're a French nationalist, in which case he stands for Le Gloire du République, the glory of the Republic. De Gaulle dies. In the early 1970s, the British reapply for membership, and they get it. Suddenly, the Commonwealth nations are cut off from Britain, and they're basically on the world stage on their own. But Britain gets to conform more and more to the Franco-German Italian system, that have been set up in the common market. But it's never a good fit. And this is going to come back later. Another step towards unity is, that was item J, in the early 1980s, as the Cold War is still going on, a step is taken called the Schengen Agreement. The Schengen Agreement eliminates borders within the European Economic Community. So you can now go from Italy to France without the major hassle of going through a full-bore customs inspection. If you go from here to Canada, you will have to go through a full-bore customs inspection. If you go from here to Mexico, same thing. Well, the Schengen Agreement is going to get rid of that. So most of the border controls between the European countries are eliminated. Gone. This is going to also have an effect in very modern, contemporary times. At the end of the Cold War, the Europeans come to celebrate. And in 1992, they gather in Maastricht, Holland, and promulgate the Maastricht Treaty of 1992. The European Economic Community is going to be replaced by the European Union. It will have a flag, a bit like our Betsy Ross flag with a round L of stars, but a brighter blue and gold stars rather than a navy blue and white stars. The European Union will have a parliament. It will be able to promulgate laws. The European Union will have a much stronger role vis-a-vis the nations. And the nations will be expected to conform to the Union. So the European Union is much more like a rebuilt Roman Empire or Carolingian Empire than certainly was the economic community before it, and that one of the real earnests of this is the establishment of a single European currency. Originally, it was going to be called the ECU, the economic unit, but then somebody realized that that's a French term. So instead, European money is called the euro. Britain refuses to join the Eurozone. The euro is used almost everywhere in Europe, but the British still use their pound sterling. They're allowed to do this as long as they conform in other ways. So the European Union is a transnational government. Now, are the nation states eliminated? No. But the border controls have been eliminated by the Schengen Agreement. The economic controls from the European Steel and Coal Community have eliminated the European countries' ability to make definitive economic policy for their own people. Less and less does London or Paris or Rome make policy for England, France, or Italy. More and more, it's the European Parliament that does. More and more, it's the European Union that does. Now, with the fall of the Soviets, from 1995 through 2013, the European Community and NATO expand eastward. You'll look there and you'll see a lower map of medium gray, and that is NATO today. NATO includes... Wait, no, that can't be right. That's the European Union today. But it has the Ukraine. North of the Black Sea, you'll see the Crimea, which is controlled by Russia now, and you'll see the Ukraine. Because Turkey was there, I assumed it was NATO. Anyway, I put this map on there. It's either a European Union map, which includes Turkey, or it's a NATO map that includes the Ukraine. Both of which seem weird to me as I look at it now. In any event, it goes. These organizations go eastward. Why? Because Eastern Europe does not want to come under Soviet rule again or Russian rule again, which is exactly what Putin wants. So there is tension now between NATO and the European Union in the west and center of Europe and east of Europe in parts, and the Russians who want to regrow their empire back. The Russians supply Europe with its natural gas, though, which allows the Russians to mute a lot of anti-Russian sentiment in European circles, because the threat is, if you criticize us, we'll just cut off your gas, and then your people won't have power. The biggest change to come to Europe in terms of ethnicity since the fall of the Roman Empire happens after 2010. In addition to European nations accepting millions of guest workers over the years from the former imperial lands of Britain and France, there's a civil war in Syria which destabilizes the Middle East. And again, you have millions of millions of Middle Eastern men who decide that the best place to be is Europe. So they and some women and children begin illegally crossing into Europe. They go by sea, by raft, by land, whatever. And then the press and its heartstring pulling come along. There's a boy whose dead body washes up on an Italian beach, and suddenly Europe is horrified at how difficult it is for these poor refugees to get from their war-torn homelands to Europe. So the European community nations begin opening themselves up to massive Middle Eastern immigration. The Germans, under Angela Merkel, promise 1 million people. Germany has 80 million people or so. 1 million people is a big deal, especially if it's 1 million people in a year or two. That's a big influx in a country that doesn't have a great record of assimilating new people culturally. This mass folk wandering has an effect everywhere because the immigrants are not coming in as individuals. They're being settled by the government in groups. The government is also providing them with social welfare benefits, so they don't need to get jobs. They are being supported by the taxpayers of the European countries that are hosting them. This taxpayer support through the social welfare state is preventing the immigrants from needing to go out and get jobs, from needing to assimilate. So they set up self-ghettoized communities. In some of these communities, the police don't go unless they go in large groups. In some of these communities, the local law is Sharia law, not the law of whatever country they're in. And the political left is weird on this point because on the one hand, they stand for the human rights of women and children. On the other hand, they don't want to seem to be Islamophobic. So are they going to insist that these little ghettos inside of their countries are going to protect the rights of women and children in a Western way? Or are they going to allow Muslim men to do what they do in the old country? And so far, the answer is mixed. The shock to the cultures of the European countries has created the rise of a new right wing in Europe and has caused Britain to exit the European community and by extension to exit the Schengen zone, to allow them to set up border controls again and to set their own immigration policy more definitively. Because the British people determined that they want their policies determined in London, not by the European Parliament. The effects of mass Middle Eastern immigration, uncontrolled mass immigration into Europe, are still to be felt. We are still working through what is going to happen as a result. But it is a huge challenge for this reason. Unlike the United States, after World War II, most Western European countries moved a bit to the left of us and embraced what is called social democracy. Social democracy, a bit, is what Bernie Sanders is cribbing from when he talks about democratic socialism. But he didn't invent the idea. The idea is Western European social democracy. Womb to the tomb government benefits, government controlled and provided health care, government minimum standard of living, basic income, basic welfare, basic housing, basic food, all guaranteed by the government. So the productivity of every year of the average European worker is much less than the productivity of the American worker because they're much less worried about losing their jobs. But now you have an influx of millions of people who do not know the language, who do not abide by the cultural norms, and who do not work, who are being supported by this governmental womb to the tomb, cradle to grave social welfare net. It is creating a strain. The schools are feeling the strain, just as American public schools near the Mexican border are inundated by transient kids who are living in the United States illegally. The European schools are being swamped with large numbers of people who can't speak their language, who aren't used to the cultural norms, and who are there in schools because they happen to be living there semi legally. There is no pathway for these people to become French, German, Italian, Swedish, Norwegian, in part because the people who made the refugee trip don't want to. Right now, they have everything that they could possibly want. They're away from the violence, they're on their own. The Europeans don't come into their communities and police them. They are supported by the Europeans. If you don't care about being productive, and if you don't care about joining the society, it is the best of all possible worlds, but it's a problem. And it's creating tensions in Western Europe and in Central Europe and in Eastern Europe. The Poles and the Hungarians refuse to take part in this, and they are deemed as racists. Governments are being threatened by right wing parties. And in Europe, unfortunately, right wing parties don't just mean conservatives, they mean neo Nazis in many cases. So that's serious stuff. The last thing I'll talk about, besides the unification of Europe, is postmodernism. Postmodernism and deconstructivism are two ideas that come out of French existentialism. Postmodernism and deconstructivism. And the name for both of these is a Frenchman named Jacques Derrida. Imagine a philosophy that says that reality is subjective, that there is no objective reality. Not only is there no objective value of right and wrong, of good and evil, but there is no objective reality. We can and should, Derrida writes, deconstruct these false notions of truth, of good, of heroism, of virtue, and instead replace it with a complete free-for-all, where your subjective opinion is treated as if it's objectively real. You don't have to acknowledge the physical realities of the world. You don't have to compromise with the beliefs of the people around you. You don't have to adapt yourself to the world as it seems to be to the rest of us. You, because you're supported by your government, can do whatever you want and you're not accountable. You can insist that other people join in your belief. You can insist that other people be forced to act as if what your subjective opinion is true. There is no objective reality according to Derrida. There is no objective reality according to postmodernism. Instead, the pretenses of objective reality, the pretenses of people like me who say, how many genders are there? Well, 2. There is evil and there is good, and you can tell by looking at them. Our culture believes in inalienable human rights, and that means that you have to accept that other people are going to be free and are going to disagree with you, and they have to accept that you are going to be free. On the one hand, postmodernism destroys notions, deconstructs. I'm sorry, they use the word deconstruct, not destroy. Destroy would be so negative. No, deconstructing. That's a much more positive term. That we must deconstruct these notions of virtue and truth and right and wrong and good and evil, of gender, of anything that seems objectively real. No, we can fight against all this. But on the other hand, they are notably intolerant of people who maintain that they are wrong and that the traditions that evolved in Europe and the world over the last few thousand years are valid. They treat such peoples as enemies. So, if you want to understand the culture war that exists between left and right, not only in the United States, but in the broader world, You should study deconstructivism. You should study postmodernism. You should learn who Jacques Derrida is. You should listen to the man speak. He's on YouTube. Because the ideas being touted by the international left that people like me find completely unacceptable, that have pushed the West from a society that basically agreed on the big things, didn't agree around the edges, into a society that completely disagrees about the basic things. Postmodernism is not Western. Postmodernism's ideas do not come in any way compatible with the ideas of Judeo-Christian liberalism. Postmodernism is a different thing entirely. And you folks have been swimming in it since you were babies. Our popular culture is fraught with, tainted by, touched by this new notion, which has never successfully run a society, which is less than, just about as old as I am, give or take, and which purports to liberate you from the chains of objective reality by allowing you to create your own reality without any limit, without any consequence, and without having to tolerate others who refuse to go along with it. That's it. You will have the exam on Monday. Study the other exams, study the study guide, study beyond those things, because I don't promise to limit to any study guide, but mostly I construct my finals from old exams. So if you study them and study the quizzes, you should be fine. Any last minute questions? I'll see you on Monday then. You can talk quietly and so on. Thank you. You don't have to.